For years, Windows users have heard the same story about Linux. It's powerful, but complicated. Fast, but unfriendly. Great for programmers, but a nightmare for normal people. So when a group of everyday Windows users agreed to switch to Linux for just 7 days, most of them went in with low expectations. Some expected to quit after a few hours. Others assumed it would feel like stepping back in time. What actually happened over the course of that week surprised almost everyone involved. On day 1, the biggest emotion was fear. These users weren't beginners with computers. They used Windows daily for work, gaming, school, and creative projects. But Linux felt unknown. The first shock came even before installing anything. Instead of paying for an operating system or hunting for shady activation keys, they downloaded Linux for free, legally, from an official website. That alone felt strange. A full operating system, no cost, no trial period, no Activate Windows watermark waiting to appear later. The installation process was the next test. Many expected a wall of technical options and cryptic warnings. Instead, they were greeted by clean installers with simple language. Choose language, choose keyboard, choose whether to install alongside Windows or replace it, click Next. On modern Linux distributions, the installer looked no more complicated than installing Windows itself, and in some cases, simpler. A few users were shocked when the entire installation finished in under 15 minutes, including updates, without forcing multiple reboots. When the desktop finally loaded for the first time, the reaction wasn't confusion, it was disbelief. The interface looked modern, polished, and fast. Animations were smooth. Windows opened instantly. There was no sense of the system thinking before responding. Several users commented that it felt like their computer had been upgraded, even though the hardware hadn't changed at all. Older laptops that struggled on Windows suddenly felt usable again. Day 2 was about daily tasks. Web browsing, email, watching videos, office work. This is where many expected Linux to fall apart. Instead, browsers like Firefox and Chromium worked exactly as expected. Streaming platforms loaded without issues. Video playback was smooth. Office work was handled by free alternatives that opened Word and Excel files without drama. For most basic tasks, users forgot they were even on a different operating system. That was the first real surprise. Linux didn't demand attention, it just worked. One user pointed out something subtle but important. On Windows, there's a constant background anxiety. Pop-ups about updates. Notifications about antivirus subscriptions. Random prompts asking for permission or advertising Microsoft services. On Linux, the system was quiet. No ads, no nagging, no forced reminders. The computer felt like it belonged to them again, not to a corporation constantly pushing something. By day 3, users began exploring customization. This was where Linux really started to change perceptions. On Windows, customization usually means changing wallpaper, maybe the taskbar color, and that's about it. On Linux, everything could change. The layout, the icons, the animations, the shortcuts, the entire workflow. Some users recreated a Windows-like layout to feel comfortable. Others went in the opposite direction and built minimalist setups that looked like something from a sci-fi movie. What shocked them wasn't just that customization existed, but how easy it was. No registry hacks. No third-party tools filled with ads. No risk of breaking the system. Settings were exposed, documented, and reversible. One user spent hours customizing their desktop, not because they had to, but because it was genuinely fun. Performance became a major talking point by day 4. Systems that had felt sluggish on Windows suddenly felt snappy. Boot times were shorter. Shutdowns were instant. Apps opened immediately. Even on high-end machines, users noticed that Linux simply wasted less time. There were fewer background processes consuming resources, fewer invisible services running for no clear benefit. Gaming was the biggest concern going into the experiment. Many assumed Linux would fail here completely. On day 5, they tested it. Steam installed easily. Games downloaded normally. To their surprise, many Windows games ran perfectly, sometimes even better. Compatibility tools handled the translation behind the scenes. Controllers worked, multiplayer worked. For the majority of popular titles, the experience was nearly indistinguishable from Windows. There were issues, of course. A few games didn't launch. Some required tweaks. Anti-cheat systems caused problems in specific cases. But what surprised users was how small the list of problems actually was compared to what they expected. Linux gaming wasn't perfect, but it was far from the disaster they'd been warned about for years. Security became a topic around day 6. Windows users are used to antivirus software, scans, warnings, and fear-driven messaging about malware. On Linux, the approach felt completely different. Updates came from trusted repositories. Software was installed from official sources, not random websites. Permissions were clear and transparent. The system didn't treat the user like someone who was constantly about to make a mistake. Several users realized they hadn't thought about viruses at all during the week. That absence of stress was noticeable. The system felt stable, predictable, and resilient. Even when experimenting with settings, nothing broke permanently. Mistakes could be undone. Worst-case scenarios were rare and well documented. By day 7, something unexpected happened. No one was counting the hours until they could go back to Windows. In fact, some were dreading it. Linux had quietly become normal, comfortable, familiar. The learning curve, they feared, never truly appeared. Instead, there was a steady sense of gaining control and understanding rather than fighting the system. One user summed it up perfectly. On Windows, they always felt like a guest in someone else's house. On Linux, they felt like the owner. The system didn't hide things. It didn't make decisions without asking. It didn't change behavior overnight with forced updates. It respected the user's choices. That doesn't mean Linux was perfect. Certain professional software still required Windows. Some hardware needed manual setup. Learning new tools took time. But what surprised everyone was that these challenges felt manageable instead of frustrating. The community documentation was helpful. Solutions were logical. Problems had explanations, not mystery errors with random codes. When the 7 days ended, reactions varied. Some users switched back to Windows because of specific software needs. Others set up dual boot systems. A few removed Windows entirely. But every single participant walked away with a changed perspective. Linux was no longer that weird system for hackers. It was a serious, polished, everyday operating system. The biggest surprise wasn't speed, customization, or even gaming. It was trust. Linux didn't feel like it was spying, selling, or manipulating. It felt honest, transparent, designed to serve the user rather than extract value from them. That shift in relationship changed how people thought about their computers. Many admitted they had defended Windows for years without realizing how much frustration they'd normalized. Slowdowns felt inevitable. Ads felt unavoidable. Forced changes felt normal. Linux exposed those assumptions. It showed that an operating system doesn't have to fight its user. By the end of the experiment, one question kept coming up. If Linux can do all this, for free, with less hardware, fewer distractions, and more control, why isn't it more popular? The answer seemed less about quality and more about habit, marketing, and fear of change. 7 days wasn't enough to master Linux, but it was enough to break the myth. Linux wasn't hard. It wasn't ugly. It wasn't unstable. For many Windows users, the real shock wasn't what Linux lacked. It was what Windows suddenly felt like it was missing. And once you notice that, it's very hard to unsee it.